everyone, welcome to Demystifying the PhD application process webinar. We'll give it a few minutes for people to join and then we'll kick off. Let me make sure I share the right screen. So whilst we're giving everyone a chance to join, the way the webinar will work today is we'll kick off by running through some of the high level stuff about what a PhD training network and Centre for Doctoral Training are, talk a bit about YES DTN and UNRISK, which are the two programs that we've got here today, and then we'll throw over to our PhD panel to discuss some of your questions. The way we'll gather questions is there's a Q&A tab that you should be able to see at the bottom. So if you start popping your questions into that and we'll answer those as we go. We won't be able to throw to anyone to talk live, unfortunately, apart from the panelists, just because we're expecting quite a lot of people today, so that we won't be able to do that. Lauren is also in the postgraduate researcher support team that I'm in, and she will be throwing some answers in the questions to the questions. And we also have Ken and Sebastian, who are the two program directors for the two, but YES DTN and UNRISK. I think all of our panelists have joined. Okay. Brilliant. Okay. So we'll get started, and I'll start with the presentation, and firstly by introducing myself. Hi, I'm Heather Selly. I work in the postgraduate researcher or PGR support team here at Leeds. I also did my PhD in the School of Earth and the Environment, to have some personal experience of going through this process. Our hope today is kind of run through the different PhD networks training centres and talk a bit about the application process, and then hopefully answer any questions. Although I will flag if there's specific questions around eligibility and English requirements, then that's a question for our admissions team, and Lauren will post that in the chat so that everyone has those email addresses and links. So, what is a doctoral training network and a Centre for Doctoral Training? They're partnerships between universities, non-university partners, and wider communities. A doctoral training network brings together wide research areas to come together and have and essentially be a network for you to come together, go to some less specific subject-based training, and tend to have larger cohorts, whereas centres for doctoral training are focused on a specific area. So for UNRISK, that's around uncertainty and climate change, and tend to have smaller cohorts. They provide fully funded PhDs, so you have a stipend, so that's what you take home at the end of the day to pay for your rent and your living expenses, and that's tax-free. You have a training funding pot, which is called an RTSG, Research Training Support Grant, and that's what you use to pay for conferences and if you're doing any travel related to your PhD. You also have fees which go straight to the university, so all of that is covered within these two programs. You'll see as you're looking for PhDs in the UK, there's different funders, but the majority are funded through the UK Research and Innovation Council and the sub-councils. Both programs we're talking about today are funded through NERC, the Natural Environment Research Council. And with that, you're part of a wider community across the whole of NERC and the different CDTs and DTMs. You'll also discover that there's a lot of acronyms related to this, so please do shout in the chat if you, I see nodding from the panelists already, so please do say in the chat if we are getting stuck in the acronyms and what things are. So who are we? You're going to hear about UNRISK today and YES DTN. Both programs are supported at the University of Leeds in the School of Earth and Environment with my team, hence hosting this. And we'll pass over initially to Ken, who is the director of UNRISK CDT, which is recruiting for the first time this year. Ken, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, thanks very much, Heather. Yeah, so I'm Ken Castelaw. I'm a professor in School of Earth and Environment in Leeds, and my research area is generally atmospheric science and climate, but specifically aerosols and clouds. So we have also two centre directors, one at UCL and one at Exeter. So yes, UNRISK is a centre for doctoral training where all the PhDs work on something related to climate uncertainty and risk. This is the purpose of a CDT, to all work on a sort of a common challenge area. So this is obviously an extremely important challenge at the moment, to understand climate uncertainty and pass that information to stakeholders. So the PhD projects will combine two of the areas of climate science, data science, and decision science. So we've designed a program where students will study two of those things as part of their PhD, but then we'll provide training which will cover all three of those areas. So all students will emerge from UNRISK with the expertise in all three of those areas. And these science areas, our whole focus has been designed around the needs of potential employers. And we have a very large number of organizations involved, over 30, who've signed up to be part of our training, part of delivering the training, but also hosting placements and joining things like challenge weeks. So some of these organizations could become future employers for you. So the advantage of a CDT, if I dare say, against the alternative ways of doing a PhD, is that all students within a cohort will be working on the same overall challenge. So there'll be a lot of connectivity between the students, shared interest, shared knowledge, and learning from each other as well during the training sessions. So you might be working alongside someone who has fantastic machine learning skills and another PhD student who's more on the decision side, and all of that will be pulled together during our training programs. So we intend to take on about 12 students, 12 to 15 at most per year, over 3 cohorts. So in the first cohort, by the time you get to the end, there could be over 40 PhD students in UNRISK. Okay, thank you. And we'll answer any questions shortly.
Brilliant, thanks, Ken. And just to summarise, as I was saying earlier, you get your stipend, and in UNRISK, that's for 3.75 years or 3 years and 9 months to include a placement. For 3 months, the fees are covered, you'll get the additional research training support grant, and then you'll have your cohort specific training that's covered as well. And then Sebastian, I know both Ken and Sebastian will be answering questions at the same time, so there might be a bit of jumping between screens and things.
Yes, I was just answering one. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Sebastian Rost. I'm a professor for global seismology in the School of Earth and Environment in Leeds, and I'm the director of this Yorkshire Environmental Science Doctoral Training Network, which is actually a doctoral landscape award that we got awarded recently. So in contrast to what Ken just discussed, is we are much broader. So we don't have a strong focus on anything. We pretty much cover all of NERC's science remit in our collaboration between the University of Leeds and the University of York. So in more detail, we cover atmosphere and climate, dynamic earth and natural hazards, including geosciences, in the broadest sense, and then ecology, evolution, and biodiversity on the biology side of things. And since we're so broad, a lot of our projects are actually interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, covering different aspects of one problem with different partners. So in Leeds, we are working with pretty much everybody who works in the Natural Environment Research Council science remit. And in York, we work with the Wolfson Atmospheric Chemistry Labs, so very specialized people over there. Because we're a bit broader, we have training that also gives wider skills training. So we do less technical training compared to a CDT, but we do a lot of training for different careers in our training. And yes, so as you've seen, the last one, probably the biggest difference is that we fund typically only 3.5 years studentship. But there is a possibility for an extension for another 3 months if you do a placement with one of our about 50 partners that are part of our network. We cover all university fees. Even when you're an international candidate, you don't have to worry about the fees at all. And we pay the typical stipend at the UKRI level. And we provide a research and training support grant of £7,000, which is slightly higher than in the CDT because many of our students do a bit more discovery science, a lot of field work, which requires a bit more funding. And then we have our cohort training, which is about, I don't think, we do about 10 training events per year or something like this for the cohort. And our application deadline is January 8th. And we're looking at 24 to 26 studentships each year for the next 5 years.
Brilliant, thanks, Sebastian. And we'll throw to the panelists in a bit and get them to introduce themselves. But first, we're going to run through a couple of application process things. So for YES DTN, you can only apply for one project. For UNRISC, you apply for one main project, and there's an option to select a second choice project as well. You may see terminology such as CASE, which is another acronym online, and that means Collaborative Award in Science and Technology, and that means that there's an external partner associated with that project. We always strongly advise for you to get in touch with potential supervisors before applying. And if you need any further guidance, please check out both of the program's websites. There's a lot of application support and information there. The two programs have different interview processes. In UNRISC, it's one interview covering a 5-minute presentation of your interest in the project and your suitability, and then questions focusing on your subject-specific past experience, soft and transferable skills. In YES DTN, there is 3 short 15-minute interviews with each panel focusing on a different aspect. The first being the subject-specific, and then the second 2 being skills-based panels. And don't underestimate your transferable and soft skills when you're applying for PhDs. It's not always all about the subject knowledge. Some general guidance for preparing for PhD interviews is, if you can, try to arrange a meeting with your potential supervisor or supervisors. In UNRISC, because you can put a second project, we recommend reaching out to both the primary project and the secondary project supervisor. It may be useful to use things such as the STAR techniques, where you set the scene, you describe the goals, you explain what you did, and you share the outcome in your answers in your application and also in your interview. If you're not set on which PhD program or project you want to apply for yet, there's lots of different places that you can look for. You can look for projects not just at Leeds but other places as well. And a lot of the information, although we're focusing on YES DTN and UNRISC today, will be broadly applicable applying for projects across the UK. I always recommend that you practice with a friend or record yourself saying record yourself practicing, for instance, with UNRISK your presentation, so you get comfortable with the information, and make some notes, but don't overdo it. We appreciate that all of you will have different commitments and different levels of time to be able to dedicate to preparing. So these are short interviews, so be aware that don't dedicate all of your time to prep for the interview. Equal opportunities. So both programs are offering additional support to underrepresented groups within the NERC Natural Environment Research Council remit, and these are Black, Asian and minority ethnic candidates, disabled people and those from disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds. This only applies for UK-based or home fees paying candidates, and the additional support includes ring fencing 10% of interview slots, and then also we're in the process of approval for ring fence scholarships for these underrepresented groups. For more information, please check out the website and also feel free to email us. As I said at the start, if it's related to whether you're eligible, whether you need different English certifications and levels, please email the admissions email that Lauren has put into the chat. And I will stop sharing there. What I'll do is ask the panel to introduce yourselves, and then I've got a little poll to try and help us gauge how many home applicants versus international, so we know how to answer the questions a bit easier and guide things. So panel, if you're ready, I'll start in my top left corner. Saffron, please can you introduce yourself, say what university you're at, your kind of research area, and if you're on a training program already.
Hey, hi everyone. I'm Saffron. I'm a second-year PhD student in the University of Leeds. Broadly, my research area is atmospheric science, specifically looking at the impacts of explosive eruptions on the polar ozone layers. And I'm on the Panorama DTP, which I think has now become, or is very similar to the YES DTN.
Yes, yeah. The YES DTN is a follow-on, so exactly right. Brilliant. Thank you, Saffron. Erin, I'll go to you. Erin and Saffron and Joe are in the same room, so I'm just making sure that the microphone turns off on one. And
I just use Joe and Sappy, so we're next to each other. Yeah, hi, I'm Erin. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in Leeds, and I'm in the Panorama DTN, which, as we said, is moving towards the replacement is YES. And I study the impact of clouds on the climate, and I'm actually one of Ken's PhD students.
Brilliant, thank you. Laura, you're up next.
Hi everyone, I'm Laura. I'm a third-year PhD also at the University of Leeds and also on the Panorama DTP. I study the emission of metals and their transport in the atmosphere from volcanoes. And yeah, I mostly do fieldwork in Iceland and also have a case partnership. So I can touch on that if people are interested in what that looks like.
Brilliant, thank you. And Joe?
It's unmuted.
Cool. Hello, I'm Joe. I'm a third year at the University of Leeds, also in Panorama. And so I do atmospheric aerosols, but I look more at observations and lab work. So I look at particles that make their way into clouds and form ice. And I'm also a case partner with the Met Office, so can help with questions like that too.
Brilliant, thank you. And Cicely?
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. Hi everyone, I'm Cicely. I'm coming to the end of my third year, also at the University of Leeds. I'm based in the same school as other PhD students, which is the School of Earth and Environment, but I'm on an interdisciplinary separate PhD program called the Extinction Studies Doctoral Training Program. I work on illegal wildlife trade and exploring how technological solutions work in practice, or don't work in practice. And my project has involved a lot of fieldwork in Indonesia, so I can speak more to any projects related more to conservation biology or using interdisciplinary social science methods. And slightly different to other people. My project was involving proposing a project, so I can definitely speak to anything like that when you kind of want to communicate research interests that might be slightly different to advertised projects, or like how to kind of communicate if you'd like your project to go in a certain direction. Yeah, I think that's everything from me. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And next.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? I think that's fine. I'm Nix. I'm a first year PhD student, so I started back in October, so I haven't been here very long. I'm not part of a DTP or CDT or anything like that. I'm just funded by a different weird thing. But and my area of research is on looking at the evolution of photosynthesis and looking at and modeling that through using coding and modeling techniques, and looking at how the evolution of photosynthesis interacts with other like cycles such as the carbon cycle and oxygen and stuff like that as well. Obviously, I can't speak a lot on the kind of CDT and DTP stuff, but I did apply for quite a few, so I can help. So definitely ask questions about that, about what worked with the one that I applied for, and then maybe didn't work for the ones that I also applied for. And also I can talk about lots of different things about how to find the right project for you, because it did take me a long time to find the one I'm doing now. So I'm very happy to apply to talk about anything like that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. So how we'll do this is I'll kind of say a seed question, and then if you can raise your hand if you want to touch on it. There's quite a lot of attendees today and quite a lot of questions to get through, so we might have to just do a few per question, and hopefully I'll try and distribute it amongst you. We'll start with a general question around how did you decide the PhD project you wanted to apply to, and did you apply to more than one? Everyone's looking for the raised hand buttons. Laura.
So I applied to, I think, 5 PhD projects in the end. I think I started with kind of what did I enjoy about my master's degree that I was already doing. And for me, that was chemistry and volcanoes. So I knew it was something to do with that. And I think it very much came out of sort of reading articles around that. I would look at who the author of that paper was, and then I'd sort of find their profile on the university website. Some of them I just emailed, explained who I was, the sort of PhD project I wanted, said, what have you got available this year? And then looked into it that way. Some of it I did just look down the list of published projects and sort of just saw what title excited me. And then for me, a couple of things were really important. I wanted to do field work and I wanted to gain lab skills. So it was sort of, that was the way that I identified projects, it was what am I most interested in and what fill the skills gap that I wanted to get out of doing a PhD.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm sure at some point I will mess up the mute-unmute system. Nix.
Yes, yeah. So I applied for a lot more. I won't say how many because it's quite a large number, but it's more than 10. But like I finally got mine. I got mine in quite late. I got mine in July, but I applied for a variety of things, and I think it's because I wanted to get. But they were all fairly similar in terms of skills. So they all looked at modeling. They all looked at kind of the skills I wanted to get out of. Because I think for me, although I'm really interested in the topic I'm doing at the moment and the topics I applied for, it was a lot about the skills I wanted to learn through a PhD process as well. So it was about the skills, it was about what the opportunities I get out of it as well, in terms of demonstrating, in terms of like those soft skills as well. And I thought that was very important for me. In terms of the actual topic, I was quite open. I was quite open to a lot of different things. I feel like, because I know that some people are quite restricted in what they can do, but I felt quite open in terms of like, actually, I will consider something that might be slightly out of my range because I actually thought it was really interesting, and I think that the skills that I bring a different perspective. So I think that even if you don't directly doing the thing that the project's on right now that you're applying for, you can still kind of write your application and like pitch yourself as like you come from a different perspective and stuff like that as well. And I think that's really important as well, especially in science and especially in like academia. This is like so that not everyone has the same view. It's like people come from different backgrounds. Like on my like in my research group, we have people we're all doing modeling, but we have people from environmental science, from physics, from chemistry, from astronomy, and it's like we all come from very different backgrounds, but we've come to the same place, and I think that's really important as well.
Brilliant, thank you. I also think I applied for around 10 PhDs before I started, but that was a while ago. Has anyone else got anything to add on that, or should I move on? Oh, Saffron.
Yeah, just really quickly. In terms of looking for my PhD, I knew I wanted to do something to do with volcanics. So when I was doing my undergrad, I found a load of this might make me sound old, Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups and all those sorts of things. And I know for volcanics, there's a group called the VMSG or something like that, where they publish a list. Someone goes through all the different DTPs and find a PhD and things, and publishes a list of all the available PhD projects. So that was a really good place for me to start. And then I ended up, my PhD that I actually ended up on is slightly different to what my background was. The only thing with that was like completely do something that doesn't have to be within what you're used to. I learned from an internship that actually what I enjoyed was research rather than volcanics, but volcanics was a good place to start. But I did make sure that I had an email exchange with my supervisors, just kind of laying out that, yes, my project's modeling, but I'd never done any coding before. Is this going to be an issue? Kind of lay out all of these sorts of things and have a conversation with them before, so you don't go in and get completely overwhelmed before you start.
Excellent advice. And it touches on something that's come up quite a few times in the chat about, touches on a couple of things around transitioning from a different background if you did a degree in something that's not specifically what your PhD is in. Did anyone completely change field on the panel? Next. Oh no, sorry.
So I kind of did. So I didn't really have much modeling or coding experience before this in my master's. I did a bit of it, but not loads, and I kind of switched from my undergrad was in liberal arts and natural sciences, and I did a lot of like art stuff, and then I transitioned to more paleo in my master's, and now I'm doing more biogeochemical modeling, like actually coding stuff. And like the switch has been really interesting, and I've had to catch up on a lot of reading, but it's been really exciting doing something new as well. And I think that and like I said before, you can like present yourself as like the different like kind of candidate and different like viewpoints towards these different things. And I'll let other people speak as well, because I've spoken a bit already. But
brilliant, thanks, Nix. Cicely. Oh, we've lost Cicely. Hopefully she'll log back in. Erin, do you want to take it whilst the technical issues are being resolved?
Yeah, there was going to happen at some point, wasn't it? All of us in the room. Yeah, so yeah, I didn't think I had moved fields specifically. I did a master's degree in modeling clouds, and I began a PhD modeling clouds, and I still have had to, and I came from a physics background, it was a very pure physics thing, but I've still had to come across a lot of chemistry, a lot of biology. And I started doing some field work as well, which I didn't expect to be doing, which was a great experience. But then I had to then get on grips with how that sort of evolves. So PhDs aren't necessarily completely linear journeys, and you're going to have to build in skills that you're thinking. So I think that as much as like it might necessarily be the case that you apply for something that and think, oh, this is exactly what I'm doing in my master's degree, and that will be exactly what I'm doing in my PhD. You're going to have to broaden, like gain new skills anyway. So it's what interests you, I think. And if that happens to be something that is not your background naturally, then as long as you've got that passion, it's fine. Because even if you have that specific background, you're still going to need to learn more.
Definitely. Don't underestimate those transferable skills as well. Cicely, hopefully.
Yeah, sorry, my internet connection dropped out. Sorry, everyone. I was just gonna say, I think in general, supervisors and interview panels are quite aware that you're going to be doing like a completely different mix of methods. So for instance, obviously you spend your whole university career like learning different methods and disciplines, so I wouldn't underestimate your ability to like be able to quite flexibly understand elements of different disciplines. And for instance, you can always have a look at what associated fields are. Like often with PhDs, they're looking for people who are quite innovative and quite creative, which seems to be quite a big process. Quite a big emphasis in the Yorkshire Environmental Science DTN. So I think, it doesn't have to be just that it's, oh, I've done X, Y, Z in my past. You can also think about what you're passionate about, like what do you hope to achieve, or is there like a subfield or new emerging area of the discipline that you find really interesting that might be relevant to bring in. So for instance, I didn't have any training in more social science methods, but both of my siblings had done social science degrees, and I sort of had like an associated interest, and like my kind of personal and political views were more aligning with like this more slightly holistic understanding of my area, which is conservation biology. And those kind of trends have been increasingly reflected in the field. So for me, it was quite easy to like marry using these more creative methods like with my initial discipline. And if you are on a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary program, you kind of have to be quite comfortable being uncomfortable in terms of like joining these different disciplines together. So if that feels exciting to you and you're like looking forward to more learning opportunities, I would personally just highlight that in any applications, and just show that you can be flexible and state what your research interests are. Basically, it doesn't have to be just what you've done, it can be what you'd like to do. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think a few of you already touched on this. There was a question about how do you assess whether you'd be a good fit with your supervisor on the more kind of working together human side of PhD life. Next, you're in my top left corner.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it, I definitely assess this, is just if you have an interview with them beforehand or like just a meeting with them beforehand. A lot of them is about vibes, which is quite an interesting thing to say. But it is about like, do you feel in the moment, if you're having a Zoom meeting or if you're in person with them, that you could spend, 3-4 years with this person, basically, in terms of like them supervising you? And it's a lot about like, do they seem nice, or like, is the vibes connecting between you? Like, some people like to make jokes, some people like to be more serious, and it's like, can you connect on that kind of like, do you have the same kind of personality in terms of like, not only work, but also like, I think that's kind of quite important. And like, I knew with mine, like, I emailed them after I had the interview. I said that was the best interview I've had. I felt really calm. I felt really relaxed. You helped me feel really relaxed, and like, and I got it. And it was like, and I think it's because the kind of like meeting and the interview was really relaxed, and you can kind of instinctively tell, I think, whether you will get along with the person. I don't know whether that's like too out there, but I think that it is, you can kind of tell, definitely.
You are going to be spending a lot of time with the person, and being able to grab a cup of tea or coffee with them is always a good aspect to have. Erin?
Yeah, I think I was speaking on Saffron's mic. I agree largely with Nick's there that the vibe, the instinct, you can go a lot with your instinct on how you feel when you talk to people. Talking to them is absolutely essential, and you definitely need to have that conversation. I think I really wouldn't have wanted to do a PhD with someone that I'd never met, even online. I think another thing that I would absolutely 100% recommend is either contacting through the supervisor or by yourself the PhD students in that person's group. They will be able to tell you what the PhD supervisor is like on a day-to-day basis, and how they operate, whether they're quite hands-off, whether they're quite hands-on, the sort of things that they'll have more of an insight into how it's like over 3.5 years. And you can have people that are like wonderful. Like I'd say almost everyone I know in this department is great, but like there are people who I know my natural working style just wouldn't work with very well. And whereas like I gel, I think maybe Ken will disagree, but I think I gel very well with Ken. I think I get on, and we have a good working relationship, which I think with other staff members, styles of supervisions wouldn't necessarily work as well for me. So definitely like talk to those things. And if a supervisor's not willing to, obviously like some supervisors will be supervising their first PhD student, but if a supervisor isn't necessarily willing to put you in touch with their PhD students, then that's make of that what you will.
Brilliant, thanks, Erin. And I've also seen some questions around how do you contact your potential supervisors. I'm going to throw it to Joe and put you on the spot.
Yeah, so that's good because it gives me something to answer now that Erin completely stole my talk to the other PhD students. But so just send an email. Don't panic too much. Just send an email. Just say who you are, where you are, what you're doing, what your experience is, and see if maybe they want to get on a quick Zoom chat or a Teams call. But just send the email. That's the first step is reaching out, and once we've reached out, you can have those conversations and go from there. But I would say if you haven't sent an email and you're applying for a project, I'd recommend doing that, just to sort of figure out what their idea of the project is and on how they work, and things like that. So just don't hesitate about reaching out.
And also a tip for you can email someone multiple times. Supervisors' inboxes are messy and full, so don't feel like you're going to be bugging them. Email them as many times as you need to. Sorry, Ken and Sebastian, for saying that. Saffron, do you have anything to add around, feeling the vibe of the supervisor and also how you contact?
Kind of two small things. Is like one thing in terms of getting in contact with the supervisors and talking to them, absolutely, definitely do that. Although one thing to bear in mind, if you're having Zoom calls or Teams calls, some people are a bit more awkward over Teams than they are actually in person, or vice versa. So it might be worth, if you can, having an in-person meeting. Appreciate that's difficult if you're an international student or something. And the other thing to bear in mind is the application's open now, right? Yeah. Don't you have to wait to apply. You don't have to wait for their response to your email to apply, because it's coming up to Christmas break, so a lot of the academics will be kind of taking time off. So that might be why they're taking a while to respond. But if you're getting in contact after the application deadline, that's not a big deal either.
Thanks. Ken?
Yeah, maybe I can respond as a supervisor who gets lots of these emails. And you definitely need to talk to a supervisor before you apply, ideally. But if, it's Christmas and people are maybe traveling a lot, there's a lot of big conferences this time of year, they may not get back to you on time. So you should still apply. You should list their project, but bear in mind that they won't be shortlisting you until, or at least they won't be contributing to the evaluation process until, in the case of UNRISC, end of January and until the 3rd of February. So you have probably 2 or 3 weeks in February to get in touch with them and say, I've submitted my application, and now I'd like to talk about the project. And that could be all that it takes for you to become their preferred applicant. So it's not too late. If I had an absolutely fantastic applicant come in January and said, I've already put my application in because I couldn't contact you over Christmas, I would consider it, and I would rank it and rate it just as I would any other applicant, because we understand some students haven't seen these opportunities until quite late. We get that. So it's absolutely fine, and we're only interested in choosing what are for us the best applicants for our PhD, not whether you happen to see the advert early enough to contact us before Christmas. Okay.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ken, for the supervisor perspective. Cicely, did you have anything to add on feeling out what supervisor might be right for you? And
yeah, I was just going to add on to what Nick's was saying. They were talking about vibes and things like this. Yeah, I do think that's kind of the simplest thing. I think PhD supervision, like different supervisors will want different degrees of formality, but just to emphasize for people who might be concerned about these kind of things, I would say definitely in Earth and Environment and a lot of like D2P networks is that there'll be like various communities you can engage with. So there'll be your D2P community and your cohort on that. There'll probably be a research group that you'll be in. So, and it does seem in general across academia, there's like much greater awareness now of things like pastoral care amongst supervisors and like mental health support and like adjusting to any access needs you might have. For instance, I had quite a major injury in the first year of my PhD that did set me back, but I found that like my supervisor was really on my side, and like we like it was sort of a bit of an unusual situation because I wouldn't normally have expected something like that, and that was really nice. And I know in other departments and things, when people have had situations like that, supervisors have been really supportive, and like they're human too, right? And I would say it's really, really hard to do a PhD if you don't get along with a supervisor. And for instance, if you don't necessarily feel that vibe check, like there might be somebody else who might be a bit more suitable for you. And like a PhD is a long commitment. So I personally would advocate, if you really don't think you get along with a supervisor, like there will be more projects. It's not worth doing something for 3 years where your working relationship is going to be really hard. But like I said, I think that's quite rare. At the University of Leeds, I've never really heard anything in that respect, really. And then just the other thing to add about contacting your supervisor is definitely don't take it personally. I think like Ken was saying, people are really getting so many emails, and if you want someone to put energy into reading it, like you're also going to have to put the energy into writing it. So like Heather was saying, just introduce yourself, like think, what would you want to get from an email if a PhD student was contacting you in your future? Like they want to know where you're at now, they don't need a list of your CV, but you can say what you're interested in, what your master's is in. Do they have any time for a chat? Like explain your interest briefly, like try and be concise, but they don't need people emailing them saying, oh, I have this qualification, are you interested? Like be active and express like what specifically is drawing you to this opportunity. Yeah, I've had my supervisor in particular gets really overloaded with them, and it's nothing personal, but like it's really frustrating for them if they're just getting these emails where they're going to have to reply being like, oh, can I have more information? Whereas they should be able to get a little flavor of what you might be like as a student from an initial email. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents.
Brilliant, thank you. I think you've all highlighted that having a bit of reflection time on what would suit you best in a working style and relationship seems to be quite important. And it's not just about getting a PhD project, it's about getting the right one for you and the right fit for you. We'll move on to another question. I'll give you some thinking time on it. Could the PhD students kindly share how well the stipend supports covering your expenses? Additionally, are you able to set any savings aside? Joe.
Okay. Yes, so I'm speaking from Leeds here, but I think you can't obviously go living crazily, but you've got enough money for food and house. I think that sounded really bad. Yes, it's enough. You've got some money you can set aside. You've got money for food. A lot of us live in a house together, and rental compared to other UK cities is quite cheap as it is here in Leeds. But also I think there's somebody asked about teacher's assistant or demonstrating as well. There is enough money, but if you just want that extra money to save up for a holiday or buy something for Christmas, you can also demonstrate. So that's where you work with a professor and you help students, undergraduates, on a module, and you can go on field trips with that, or you can do that in a workshop, lab-based. But I would say it's definitely livable as long as you just don't go absolutely crazy. It's a comfortable life.
Ellen.
So are we sure? Yeah. So just to add on to that, I know that this isn't just a Leeds there aren't people here who are just looking at Leeds. There's people looking at London and York, and I think I can't remember the UNRISK. Sorry. Exeter, thank you. But the Leeds in particular, as that's where many of the products are being advertised, is quite an affordable city. My benchmark is how much does a pint cost? Sorry for those who aren't thinking, but you can generally find a sub £5 pint. It's maybe not in the city centre. Some pubs, you got to know where you're going, but it's not a city where everything is going to cost you so much that you're going, oh, I can go out maybe once a month and enjoy things. You can. There's things that are going on in the city, and you can actually engage in them, and that I think is quite nice about living in Leeds. And personally, that was a factor in deciding what sort of city I wanted to live in as well. I don't think I could have, London, amazing if that's where you want to be and do your things, but for me, I would rather live in a city where I can do things a bit more often than live in things. So it's fine to think about that when you're thinking about applying PhDs. You shouldn't, you've got to live here for 3.5, 4 years. So think about where you are going to be as much as what you're going to do.
Brilliant, thank you. And it has, I'm going to sound old and say, in my day, it's improved since then, because the UK, I have upped the stipend and increased it with inflation. It's not a 6-figure wage, but it is getting better, hopefully. Cicely.
Yeah, I just thought I could add, because I'm from London and moved to Leeds, and I also went to UCL in London, which seems to be on the list for them. Yeah, I think the thing, obviously, to be realistic, we are in a cost of living crisis in the UK. It's not, like people saying, it's not a very high wage, but I would definitely recommend having a budget, just because things can drain away quickly. I often have quite a lot of family responsibilities, and I do have to go to London, so it's the kind of thing book your travel early if you're going somewhere. I'm able to put a bit aside every month, and that hasn't necessarily always been the case during my PhD, because I was, if I was going somewhere for fieldwork, I'd sometimes take some time off after, which you're allowed to do. You can, if you go to a conference, you can take some holiday time off after, that sort of thing. So I think sometimes if you have slightly odd research costs, or if you're not costing everything back for some research activities, you could potentially see things drain a bit. But for instance, both of the networks being advertised today have really good amount of research support. I did my whole PhD on less, and I did cover some things like food and things like that during research. So that's something that should definitely be really encouraging. And then, for instance, with demonstrating, it's a good hourly wage. You get it every week. There's also sometimes research activities and other things. I don't know any PhD students who do part-time jobs. I personally wouldn't recommend it, because you're kind of supposed to be doing 9 to 5 with a PhD. And I know it's kind of different when people have caring responsibilities or family responsibilities as well, but also just to flag, if people are really concerned financially, the university has hardship funds, and most schools will have extra funds and other things like this. So there are usually pots of money somewhere. And yeah, you don't go to Tesco or the expensive supermarkets every time, but Leeds has a really good range of supermarkets like Aldi and Lidl and things like that, for those who are familiar with them in the UK, and the same in London, in terms of you might need to make good use of your student discount and frequent the right places, and definitely house share. I'd say particularly if you're in London, you probably wouldn't be able to find a 1-bed on a PhD wage, but I do know people who live by themselves in Leeds who prefer more of their own personal space, and they do manage it on a PhD wage. So I think if you're organized, it is really manageable. And like Heather was saying, you're coming in at a really good time, because there was a little bit where they were delayed with inflation on increasing the PhD stipend, and it's now reflected, I would say, really every academic year. And people are really aware of the financial pressures on PhD students. Definitely don't do too much teaching, though, is my advice. Money is good, but you also have to finish a PhD. But yeah, definitely having more than 3.5 years of funding is also a really good place to be in. So I wouldn't worry too much about financials like beyond the PhD, because 3.5 years is better than what I'm on, for instance, which is just 3 years of funding. So I would say for a scheme like this, it's always worth having a look at how long you have to do the PhD as well, and if top-up funding is available, which it is for some.
Brilliant, thank you. And I've seen a question about if people have freelancing jobs, coding jobs. I have had friends who've done PhDs and done side jobs on their side. I also did second for my PhD to do a full-time job for several months and then come back to it. And there was also a question earlier about part-time, and yes, you can do your PhD part-time, but obviously you'll get half of the stipend amount in that time. Saffron.
Yeah, just kind of a bit more on, in terms of, I live in Leeds, the stipend quite comfortably covers all of my expenses, and I don't particularly cheaply. So I live across the road from campus, not on purpose, but it's quite an expensive flat, and I live on my own, and I own a car, so that is quite expensive as well. And I don't particularly eat cheaply, and I still have space to save. And in terms of like, I still have money I can use to go traveling and things, especially if you're going on international conferences, tag a holiday or something onto the end of it, and then you can use your money smartly. And it also kind of makes the decision of where to go as well. So just kind of, especially in Leeds, the stipend easily covers living here. But yeah, there is demonstrating available as well, and there is different durations of demonstrating you can do. You can do stuff that's all the way through the year, or you could just do 1 semester, or you could just do the marking, which can just be like 1 or 2 weeks. So it's up to you how much you need to top it up.
I used to go and do the fieldwork demonstrating, so I'd just spend a day walking in the Lake District and then get paid a bunch of money, which was lovely. Laura.
Yeah, it just reminded me, actually, I think something else that's important to discuss with your supervisor is the budget for your project. So the DTN or the CDT give a blanket amount for research expenses, but everyone's doing different projects. So for some people, for example, in my cohort, their project has just been modeling based, and they haven't really needed to draw on their expenses at all. Whereas for someone like me and some other people in the cohort, you've got fieldwork, lab expenses, analysis costs, conference costs. And for me, I wouldn't have been able to do the PhD without applying for additional research grants. And my supervisor was quite open at the start about the fact that it wouldn't come with enough money and that I would be expected to apply for more grants and find that money. And I applied knowing that, and that was okay. But I think some people maybe they went into a project thinking it would be fully covered, and then the fieldwork took up all of their research money, and then it's been very stressful for them trying to find that additional funding for analysis costs, etc. So I think it's worth checking with your supervisor. Do they think it will be fully covered by that research grant? Do they expect you to find more money? What capacity do they have to provide that additional funding, maybe from other research pots that they have? And just make sure that you think you're signing up for something, whether that is applying more funding or whether you're like, no, I don't want the stress of that. But I think that's an important conversation to have with your supervisor too.
Definitely. So I'm gonna segue slightly into case. What is case? And I know that a few of you at the start, and I can't remember, I'm sorry, there's been so many questions, said that you're on case projects. Laura, is this from last time or is this?
No, I do have a case partner, so I can speak to that. So my case partners are the Icelandic Met Office, and it's been fantastic having that connection. So that was established by my supervisor with her past. She worked for them actually, so that's how we were connected. Formally, it means that they've given me additional research funding, which has been incredibly helpful. And I'm also going out to do a 3-month internship with them, which I'm really, really excited for. It gives you that perspective beyond academia. In this case, it's sort of civil agency, volcano monitoring, public communication, all those additional skills that you want to get from a PhD. But even informally, like when I've been doing field work, they've supported us, they provided extra logistical help. One of them is my supervisor, so I can always talk to her and get that additional input from the agency, the Met Office. So yeah, I think a case partnership is a fantastic thing to be involved with.
Brilliant, thank you. Joe.
Yeah, so couple of things. So tying on to what Laura was talking about earlier about funding, I just want to say that you're up, so that's RTSG she's talking about. So that's your research fund. So that's, you don't have to pull out your stipend, your living costs to fund your research. There's a separate account for that. So it's not like you're going to have to, you know, pay for rent and going to do field work out of the same pot. But I also have a case partner, so I'm with the Met Office in the UK, as opposed to Iceland. And so it's the same sort of thing. So they give you a bit more money, which helps you do your research. But they also pay for 3 months to go down and stay there, work with your supervisors down there at the Met Office, and you get access to their facilities. For those that do more coding and computer things, if you're doing something that is really computery, talking way out my depth here. Some people are provided with Met Office laptops, so they provide you the necessary resources you need for that. But yeah, and essentially they provide connections. You can also think of it as, you know, if it's somewhere you want to end up one day, it's a good opportunity to get involved with people there and get those connections that could help set you up for a job later down the road.
Brilliant, thank you. There's been a slight change into the case set up this year. It doesn't necessarily mean financial contribution, but we strongly encourage it. We strongly encourage it. I saw a few questions pass by around designing your own project. And for both the programs, we have set projects, but there is a collaborative nature, and PhD projects do tend to change over time because you are doing something new in a field. There's nodding going on. Has anyone else's project changed a lot from when you started? Erin.
Yeah, I applied to do a pure modelling. I sort of mentioned earlier, I applied to do a pure modelling PhD and found myself in a plane over the Arctic Ocean now 6 months in. So there's it goes in different directions. I think it's important just to have those conversations at the start and work out like what the scope for things are. There are some PhDs which do like pretty much stay down the line. There's some PhDs that are more open to begin with. You can even get the sense of that from the title of your PhD that you're applying to. Mine was very broad. It was the impact of, I actually don't know. The impact of clouds on the climate, or the impact of icing clouds on the climate. I actually can't remember which. It was always going to be about ice in some way. And that's such a broad title. It may not seem it to you if you're not interested in clouds, but that is such a broad title. There was a lot of scope for me to scope that, to sort of work out where I was fitting into that category while I'm here. And part of that initial discussion with Ken and my other supervisors was talking about, you know, what aspects of this are we interested in, what parts of this are, and there'll be some PhDs which are not like that, and both are fine, and both are things which you can be interested in. So even though there's a project that's like listed with a title, talk to the supervisor about it, because especially if you don't have maybe a view of how broad that is as a field, they might be able to say, well, actually, no, this is very broad, and part of the skill set here you're going to pick up from this particular PhD is narrowing that. Whereas some PhDs are more laid out before you start. You're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this.
Brilliant, thank you. Cicely, I know you're not on Panorama, are you? So you had a different experience.
Yeah, so I proposed my own, which isn't necessarily the case for this one. But I can speak a bit to like how I've still shaped it, because expectations do change during a PhD. And like from my friends on my DCP who applied for an existing project and they've kind of shaped it. I would say most of them are very much like starting points with the question and stuff. Like often there's going to be a lot of different bumps along the road that might not necessarily mean everything in a PhD project is achieved in exactly the way it's like laid out as. And I think someone had put in the chat, but the whole point of the PhD isn't necessarily like there's X project and you have to produce Y output. It's more about who you are as a person, but it is about how you develop as an independent and postgraduate researcher, and you can kind of pick and choose once you have one about what you want to work on. So for instance, whenever you start your PhD, you do like a skills assessment, and you can kind of like identify training priorities and needs. And in your first year, you have something called a transfer, which is basically where you demonstrate that you're able to carry on the project and complete an actual PhD. And during that time, a lot of people kind of reassess the feasibility of their project, and that only really comes from the first 9 months of doing a PhD. So for instance, I had some friends who were supposed to do research in person and it shifted online, even post-COVID. So like that obviously changes a lot about your project. And supervisors might have new ideas by the time you start, that kind of thing. So I think if you can emphasize that you're dynamic and like, yeah, every project is shapeable to an extent. So if there's an element or a method you really want to do, or like a tangent of the advertised project that you think you'd be like particularly good at doing, you can highlight that in any application. But yeah, even for the ones where there's like a list of things they want a PhD student to achieve, it will look very different. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. You can always look like what's referenced and what's associated and what do other people achieve in a 3-year period to kind of see, because it will probably be less than you actually think you're able to produce from a PhD. Yeah.
Laura?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think for me, one of the best parts of the PhD is the fact that it can evolve over the course of those 3 years. So for me, like we started with quite a clear vision of the first chapter, and then it was quite open-ended. And it just so happened we went on field work to collect one sample set. And then there were some conditions that meant, oh, there's this whole other data set we hadn't even considered was possible to get. But it just happened to be there. So we got those samples. And then that fed into like, I sort of went, oh, well, this is a natural second chapter. And this has inspired some more thoughts I didn't have until this point about where I want to take the third chapter. So I think it will almost certainly evolve over the course of your PhD. And you don't have to know now, you certainly don't have to know when you're applying or in first year exactly how it will look, but just be ready to embrace the fact that it will change, because your knowledge and your experience will increase as you do the PhD, and that will naturally feed in to how it develops.
Brilliant, thank you. Nix?
Yeah, so the obviously I'm still in first year, so I have a lot of different options after my first year of where to go. But when I applied for 2 projects from the same supervisor, my supervisor, and I had an interview for both of them, and obviously I didn't get one of them, but I got the other one, and I was still interested in a lot of the stuff from the other one. It was about exoplanets and space, and which I thought was really cool. But I have no background in physics or astrophysics or anything, which is the reason I didn't get it. But my supervisor said, "Oh, if you're really interested in that, we can add some of that stuff to my project, which I'm going to be doing." So one of my first papers that I'm going to be doing for my PhD this year is it's going to conclude. The conclusion is around importance of my research to exoplanet research and stuff. So I'm still bringing in that. My supervisor is really open and willing to, and I'm sure a lot of supervisors are, in bringing what you're interested in outside of the normal scope of the project into the project itself, and in terms of just branching out a bit. And I think that was really exciting for me, and I found it really I really like that in terms of how they actually brought that in, and I'm able to still explore that bit that I may have not got on that project, but I can still explore that side of it, even though I didn't get that project specifically, which was really, really good.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm sure as you go through your PhD, your interests will develop and evolve. Mine certainly did. Erin.
Yeah, just a quick thing on that. We've all talked about the flexibility of PhDs and like think that they evolve, and that is great, and like you can definitely put your own spin on it. It is worth noting though that you do have to finish your PhD in 3.5 years, or at least try to. I'm struggling to. And actually it's probably worth no one ever tells you this actually before you start a PhD, but a lot of people don't finish in exactly the time that's said, and they often have a month or two at the end writing up in a panic without stipends, and there's often there's support in place and you can get that support things, but it's worth being a little bit aware of that. But that aside, like you do have to finish it in 3.5 years, so you should, if you are thinking of like some sort of particularly radical change into your thing, say you're applying for a modeling thing and you want to add in something with experiment or field work, or that you want to have these elements in there, make sure you spoke to the supervisor about that first. Don't assume that you can like just like, that sounds silly because why would you, but they're like, don't assume that you can completely go left field. Like things do evolve and you get these wonderful opportunities. Like I had an unexpected fieldwork opportunity that's guided my PhD and changed my first and second chapters. But that sort of thing isn't necessarily a guarantee to happen. So think about like if there are particular things you want to do, make sure you do a project where that is going to be a core element.
True, there is a limit to the flexibility. It still needs to be in the same realm of yours and your supervisor's work. I'm gonna move on around talking about academic versus professional skills and technical skills that you might bring across. Not everyone comes straight from undergraduate or masters. Some people, I don't know if any of the panelists took some time out before they came through to PhD. Not today, that's okay. Oh, Cicely did. Were there things that you brought into your application? This is putting you on the spot, sorry, Cicely. Were there things you brought into your application from your industry work before you came to PhD? Could you see, any transferable skills in there that you felt really strongly should be highlighted?
Yeah, so this also answers something I saw briefly in the chat, but so I did an undergrad, I had a year out for my undergrad degree, and during that time I worked with a conservation organization that I worked with over every university summer, and then by the time I finished, I had like a field job for 6 months, and then I did a research internship for 6 months, and then I came back and I worked in the same project, and then after that I did a research master's. So I'd say, I mean, I can see from the chat some people like have quite extensive masters and I might have a lot of other teaching experience and things. I think any experience is good experience personally, and it's not always if it's relevant. It's like if you have something that you've learned from that you can demonstrate. So for instance, I was preparing for some job interviews recently, and the STAR approach is often referenced, but it's also worth having a Googling. There's a couple of other methods I think they're called story circles and best bits, and they can kind of be like the highlights of your experience before, and that could be professional or academic. And so I had a lot of fieldwork skills and working with volunteers and leading conservation projects, and a lot of those, are to do with transferable skills like time management and prioritization, and then also soft skills like communication and working as a team. And obviously like some of the skills required might also be about presentation, and I'd done a lot of like public awareness as part of this conservation project, so I was really comfortable presenting. So I do think you will notice a difference between the people who've gone like straight between like jumped from degree to degree, and that can sometimes create slight differences in terms of like how you adjust to being in PhD life again. And I, for instance, did find coming back into academia and like working by myself, being the only person like on my project, quite challenging, but that is something to kind of bear in mind is like if you do have a lot of experience working in different environments, like how that is specifically different to PhD environments. But I also found by the time I got to sit down for a PhD, I was like, oh, thank God. it's 3 years. I like have a bit of security, and I have like time and flexibility to get really in depth with research that you don't really get afforded in other opportunities. So I felt like kind of reflected my journey quite well. And on my DTP, for instance, there's some people who, you know, are in their 40s, 30s, so like have had other careers before. So personally, for me, I think that's a really rich part of doing a PhD. And obviously, like, it's really cool to see that these programs offer international opportunities, because that can be quite hard to find. So yeah, personally, I think the diversity makes it a more engaging research environment. But yeah, those are just some things to bear in mind.
Brilliant. And I mean, just because you mentioned international students, I can't remember if I said it in the presentation, but due to NERC Natural Environment Research Council funding, we're limited to 30% of the projects being allocated to international students, so it's very competitive. Erin.
Cheers, Sappy. Yeah, so I came straight in from an integrated master's degree, but I do genuinely think like some of the most useful in school skills that I employ on a day-to-day basis are the ones that I picked up outside of academia through like part-time jobs like selling hot tubs, like being able to talk to like a range of people, communicate ideas simply, being able to almost like sometimes sell your ideas well, you know, package a presentation in a nice way, initiate those conversations, build the sort of networks with other scientists and stuff. So I really wouldn't look at this as a purely thing of like of a completely straight academic route. And it's fine if you've got just an amazing pure academic route and stuff. But I think that wider experience is great, and that I know personally, like a lot of PhD students who I look around at and go, yeah, you're really like you're really great. Like, and they're often the ones who have had a little bit of a diversion and come round, and some of them don't have that. But like it's what you make of it really, and with this, everyone's going to bring a different skill set. I do think that it's I do think that it's very open to the skills that you could take from outside academia are very useful.
Definitely. Whenever someone comes in with some project management skills, I'm always like, oh, they're going to be on it. Because at the end of the day, your PhD is just a massive project. Joe.
Yeah, so I think I want to also emphasize you're not expected to come in and have all the skills necessary and everything. So DTN or CDT, doctoral training. So there will be training throughout it. Also just experience it, getting on the project. Sorry, I'm lost my train of thought. So essentially, when you get the project, you'll learn the skills you need. It's not necessary for you to have every skill down pat, just that you're willing to, you have some knowledge of what you might already do, what you want to do, and just an open mind and willingness to learn those things that you're not quite grasping yet.
Definitely, very good point. We're not expecting fully formed researchers to be coming in at the start of your PhD. It's about showing that you have the aptitude to undertake a PhD and have an interest in the subject. I'm gonna move on to a question around having an interest in several projects. There was a question about if there is a limit for the number of projects. So for the 2 programs of UNRISK and YES DTN, 1 for YES DTN, and a primary project for UNRISK, and then a secondary option. But the thing that I'm going to throw to the panelists and to Ken and Sebastian is, would you recommend prioritizing and applying for a few select projects, or should you apply for a whole spectrum of projects?
Well, first of all, there's a rule. UNRISK, you can apply for 2. For YES, I believe it's 1, but correct me if I'm wrong on that. So that answers that question, I think. So you can't apply for a range of projects. You can apply for 2 in UNRISK. And yeah, there might be a small advantage to applying for 2 in that, of course, we have to rank our applicants. And if you're beaten to your favorite project by a higher ranked applicant, then if you have a second project that you're genuinely interested to take, then we would consider offering you another project, the other project that you've applied for. but I want to stress that it's really important that you're serious about that and that you don't just put down another project in the hope that somehow it works out for you. It's intended to be there as a genuine option for you. So you really still need to have reached out to that supervisor, that second supervisor, and got to the same level of understanding of that project, and they've got to the same level of understanding of you, because they're going to score you as well. And if they don't score and rank you very highly, then you wouldn't be offered that PhD. So you need to do essentially double the work if you want to apply for 2 PhD positions. Don't just try and game the system by hoping it works out.
I'm going to throw to Sebastian next because he flagged this question, and then we'll go to the panelists.
Yeah, just to make sure, for YES DTN, you can only apply for a single project. You have to decide which project you're most interested in. That's for you to decide. We can't advise on that. I'd look at your interest, look at your motivation to do a PhD, and then find the project that fits your interest, fits perhaps your skills, or fits perhaps where you want to go with your career after a PhD. But you only have one PhD to apply to for YES.
I'm gonna take a jump and think that the panelists are probably going to talk about the fact that although for each of these programs you can apply for 2 for UNRISK and 1 for YES DTN, you can apply across lots of different programs and independently funded PhD projects. And perhaps how did you narrow down your research area? I know when I was applying there was Earth observation and modelling, and I applied for both and I hadn't really settled. Maybe you can touch on that, Erin.
Yes, yeah, I think for me it was a little bit simpler because I knew the field I wanted to be in, and that narrowed down a lot. I didn't want to I wanted to stay in atmospheric physics, and I wanted to look at clouds. Because that was what I was really interested in. That really helped me. I know that's not going to be the same for everyone else. What I would quickly say is that I applied for 5 PhDs across different schemes. And I think I treat it a lot like applying for jobs. Like, you wouldn't necessarily just apply for one job, because you're not going to leave yourself high and dry, especially if you're coming straight out of university and you're looking for a job as a graduate. But I don't think I could have made more than 5 quality PhD applications. I applied for 5, I got 5 offers. I don't think that it so happened that there were only 5 that I saw that I was actually interested enough to sit there and want to do them for 3.5 years. But I think you've got to think about quality v quantity. That ratio for different people is going to be different. Some people might be able to manage 10 high quality applications. I could not have done that.
Yeah, I should say I was working in a receptionist job at the time, so had a lot of spare time sat at a computer. Nick.
Yeah, so I applied for a lot. It was nearer 20 than 5, but with the but I wouldn't suggest doing that. But I think that for me, I don't think I would have got the one that I'm on now without having applied to that to a lot before. And I think that's because for me, I learned through doing a lot of applications and through being rejected and through asking for why I was being rejected and stuff like that. I learned a lot around what they wanted and what they, because I think that I hope you get a lot out of this webinar and other webinars you go to, but I think that actually doing and through the process of doing it is really important, and you learn a lot through it. And so by doing that, by going to interviews, by doing applications, I learned a lot through it. So once I got to the interview where I got this PhD now, I was actually very relaxed. I was actually very calm. I knew what was coming, and I knew how to answer the questions. And I think that kind of that learning that skill, and obviously some people have that naturally, and some people might only need one or might only not need it at all, and that might come quite naturally. But for me, it didn't, and I learned it through the different rejections and other things I've had. So I think that by applying to more than one, and you might be rejected from a few of them, but it's about taking that and what can you learn from that to apply to the next one or apply to other things you're learning. That's with jobs as well, and not just PhDs, but it's about learning through the process of doing the applications and doing the interviews and stuff like that is important.
That is a really, really strong point. Many people aren't successful on their first round and then they improve it for the next round of applications, and it is a learning process, all of this. We do try to demystify the whole application process and strength, but until you go through it, it's quite hard to get to that polished answer. Saffron.
Right, yeah, so I think I ended up applying for 4 or 5 in the end. But I think in terms of the number of applications you make, the first thing you need to do is seriously consider how much time you actually have to do these applications, because they do take a fair amount of time, and they're not necessarily the sort of thing you can just copy and paste the exact same thing for every single application. So there'll be like some bits of the application that'll be exactly the same, but things like exactly why you want to do that project will be different. And you'll want to look into what the project is. So you'll want to read through all the applications, maybe have a look through it, if they give a paper or something to read through, have a look through that paper, see whether you're actually interested in it. So the applications aren't just a quick sit down for half an hour, they're done. They are, I probably spent a day per application, partially because I'm a perfectionist anyway, but I don't think they're definitely not a short-term thing to do. So it's kind of up to you to work out how much time you have for each application, and you don't want to just do them quickly, because if they're really, really quick, they may not be the quality you want. And the other thing is, again, you're going to spend like 3.5, 4 years on these projects. So sit down and look at the projects and work out what you'd actually be happy spending 4 years on. Because if you end up choosing a project that you've just applied for 10, and like maybe the one you get is the one right down at the bottom of the list, you've still got to spend 4 years on it. And if it's not quite what you were interested in, it might be a little bit miserable.
Really good advice. Like all things, it really depends on the person applying and what you want to get from it. We're getting towards the end of the webinar now. There is a feedback form in the chat, which would be really grateful if you could fill in, just so that each year we can make improvements to these kind of things. And if there's any last minute questions, please do put them in the Q&A. As I said earlier, please email the relevant program email addresses, and then also there's the admissions email that Lauren's popped in the chat quite a few times. I can see Ken's answering that question, so that's gone. Brilliant. Is there anything that the panelists would like to add on the end? Other than good luck with the applications.
Shall I answer the last question verbally? Why doesn't UNRISK require references? It's because we don't believe they are of a uniform enough quality and veracity to help us in our decision making. Some students have access to very, very good mentors, and others don't. You know, if you went to Oxford or Cambridge or some university like that with a tutorial system, you probably have a very good relationship with a couple of people who can write outstanding references for you. If you came from other universities or from international, you probably don't have that. And it's also extremely hard to ensure we get 100% submission of references. And where we have gaps, we don't know how to then rank students that don't have something that is no fault of theirs. So it's just extremely difficult to make sense of references in a uniform and fair way. So we decided not to use them, and we'll make our own decisions based on the information we've asked for.
And that's exactly the same for YES DTN. We have the same reasons and the same rules there.
Brilliant. Thank you. I can't see any last minute questions coming in, so well done, team. You've answered over 100 questions in the last hour and a half, so well done. We'll say thank you to all of the panelists, Ken and Sebastian, and Lauren doing an excellent job in the chat, sending all the links and things like that. Please fill in the feedback form, and we look forward to seeing all of your applications. We'll be hopefully getting this recording and the recording from last week's webinar up on YouTube, which will be linked on both the websites. This recording might be up after the Christmas break because it's rapidly approaching. So thank you, everyone. And There's one question for you, Nix. Can you see that in the chat?
Oh yeah, I am from the UK, so I can't really talk about international students.
Yeah.
But I know other people that are international, and I think that their kind of like their transition to the UK is sometimes quite hard, but also I think there are in our research group, for example, there are a lot of people from China, and I know that and so there's like a group of people already here in our research group that are international, that are from like for example, China, that I think is, and that fosters a sense of community, and they're all really good friends. And I know that they go out for dinner, they go out for hikes together in Yorkshire, and it's really nice for them, I think, as well. And I think that kind of that it's kind of like a home away from home for them as well, while they're here, because a lot of them are visiting students, so like PhD students or postdocs, and I think that that's important for them. And I think that whatever country you come from, if you come to do a PhD, you will find that kind of community of other international students or other students from those countries.
Yeah, there's lots of different networks, and I should really read the full question before throwing it. Sorry, Nix. So there are international student networks, there's mature student networks and things like that. And as a PhD student, you have access to all of the student union groups and things like that. So I will say that's the end of the questions and say goodbye to everyone. Thank you for coming and have a great afternoon.